We hear an awful lot about overfishing, particularly in the commercial fishing world, but what is overfishing? What does that mean? And what are some of the factors involved with that? Now, obviously it can be as simple as a species of fish being wiped out by being caught, but that's rarely the case where it's that simple. There's lots of factors involved. Now, take the Pacific herring, for example. That's a species of fish that's been on that radar of possible overfishing for many, many years. So you can imagine a ball of bait, a ball of herring out in the ocean, and it's drifting along, and we call them balls because they survive by the idea of safety in numbers. There could be hundreds of thousands or millions of fish in one big ball. And this is like a big genetic family too, called almost like a run of salmon. So you've got a bait ball drifting through the ocean, and maybe a whale comes and takes a big bite out of it. And then all the birds and salmon and everything you possibly imagine then come and take big bites out of this bait ball. Well, there's so many of them that, you know, whales and all the natural predators probably can't, you know, collect all of those fish all at once. So they migrate through the year, they come in the shore, they spawn. Each one of those females is going to lay 20,000, 30,000 eggs, and they can rebuild that bait ball because they're extremely prolific if they have some good water and lots of plankton to feed on and good, you know, cover shoreline type environment to where they can lay their eggs and be successful with the spawn. They're going to regenerate, and that bait ball is going to be just as big or even bigger than it was before. So that's the natural way of the herring anyway operating in the wild. Now on two though, and I don't claim to understand why, but there is a natural up and down cycle to bait fish. Some years there will be a lot more, some years will be less, and that's just the way of the natural world. And that's something that I really don't know much about, but I do understand that there is a natural cycle there. Now you can imagine that a big commercial boat, you know, in the perfect world, they're going to be like a whale and just take a little bit at a time so they don't wipe out the entire bait ball. But commercial, you know, modern commercial techniques have the ability to wrap a purse seiner net completely around a ball of herring and pretty much catch every one of them and just eliminate that genetic run of fish. It's kind of a run like if you caught every salmon coming into a river at a particular time, well, you would eliminate that run of salmon. It's kind of along those lines. So that can be absolutely devastating. And you do that enough times, and you can really wipe out not only that species of fish, but the entire ecosystem and all the other fish that rely on that particular type of fish in the area. And I've seen that myself, like down in Mexico. I've watched over 10-15 year period where the sardines down there were, you know, commercially harvested so hard that we went from, you know, for rooster fish fishing, being able to just get all the bait we want, to no bait at all. And everything's starving. The pelicans are starving. The fish are just not, the fishing was just horrible for a while. And also down in Mexico, I saw something interesting one time. Have you ever seen a tuna ranch? Well, they round up baby tuna with the chase boats and helicopters and planes and you know, the big boats. They net up a bunch of baby immature tuna. Now these would be bluefin tuna because, as I understand it, they don't do tuna ranching with yellowfin because there isn't enough value to the yellowfin commercially. So this is bluefin tuna, and this would be Pacific bluefin. But I saw out there one time this giant net pen, and it took me a while to figure out what it was, but it was a tugboat pulling a giant net pen full of little jumping tuna. They were about this big. And it was like a big giant boil inside this net pen that was probably, I don't know, about half the size of a football field. And this tugboat's pulling it super slow. And what they're doing is, you know, after they've netted the tuna, they're dragging this net pen to wherever the tuna ranches because they're, you know, they're grown up, they're fattening them just like you would cattle. And in order to fatten up a tuna, you got to feed it a whole lot of food. And that may have something to do with how, you know, I saw the sardine population collapse down there. It was right about that time. So it's, you know, that was, there were 4 Mexican states involved with that. 3 of them said, no, okay, we're gonna not commercial fish the sardines. And one of the states said, oh, all right, fine, you do whatever you want, we're fishing. So it was one particular state that really hammered on the sardines down there. So, you know, at some point it all gets political and you just follow the money. And there may have been an up and down natural cycle as well, but that's just my own experience, and I've seen that other places too, and lots of people have seen stuff like that. So it is perfectly possible for, you know, modern commercial fishermen to really do a lot of damage, or not, depending on how they go about doing the fishing. So on top of that, okay, take the East Coast for example. There's a big problem with what's called the red tide. Maybe you haven't heard of that so much if you're out here on the West Coast. Well, we do have red tide here on the West Coast too, but it's a really big problem around Florida, Louisiana, up all the whole eastern seaboard and different places. It's where so much nutrients are coming down the rivers, like the Mississippi River or whatever river. Nutrients from farming, just industrial waste, just from people fertilizing their lawns, and then that ends up running into the rivers and down to the ocean. Well, that's a lot of nutrients. It's like overfeeding a fish tank. If you dump a whole bunch of food in your fish tank, there's going to be an algae bloom, the fish tank gets out of balance, and everything dies, right? So that's why these call, when the red tide is going strong, they call those dead zones, because it's just nothing's going to live there. So that is another factor, just environmental factors. How healthy is the environment? Because if there's bait fish and they're being harvested on top of bad environmental conditions, that could be a real problem. And just this past week, or just recently, an Hawaiian company, Ocean Air it's called, they're commercial farmers from Hawaii. They got approval from the EPA to start farming in net pens 45 miles off the coast of Florida. And they'll be farming redfish. So 45 miles out, okay, well, one reason they wanted to do that was, you know, to cut down on the amount of pollution, because net pens can be a real problem for pollution, where they can create that red tide type of situation. And also the food falling down onto the ocean floor can be really bad too. It builds up and creates all kinds of problems. But being 45 miles offshore, you know, they're hoping that that's not going to be such an issue, and also they can avoid some of the problems with storms. And they're also out of the state's jurisdiction because they're out in federal waters, so it's just a federal thing. So they're going to have to feed those fish too. They're going to use commercial fish food from Cargill, which it might be about 15 to 20% fish meal and fish oils from forage fish that are caught commercially. And where that comes from, I don't know. It's probably not going to be the menhaden, because that's controlled by a different company, so you know, I don't know where it's coming from. But and then the rest of the food is like wheat and poultry products and just whatever animal protein that they put together to make fish pellets. But that's all nutrients. That's all stuff that will grow the fish, but it will also have potential to really do a lot of polluting around that particular area, and as it drifts off with the currents. So, but that's a done deal. There was a lot of fighting about it, but that's a done deal. It's going to happen. But it's just another example of the types of things that can be a factor besides just the amount of fishing that's going on. So the different types of fish farming practices are just another example of something that has to be taken into account when we're talking about the overfishing, just from the pollution that they make and the abundance of bait fish that might be taken in order to feed those fish in the fish farms. I know an awful lot of the herring that are caught off the Washington coast especially they're heading across seas to feed tuna in commercial fish farms in different countries. That's just another factor that kind of plays in the whole idea of how do we know what overfishing is. And that's important if we're going to maintain our right to fish.